Speaker for today is Professor Sally Robinson from Flinders University. Sally has extensive experience in disability and community inclusion research. She will share insights on what has worked well in research and how we can build on these successes to eliminate restrictive practices. Sally, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jane, and hi, everybody. I would like to just acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Ghana land down in Adelaide, and acknowledge that land was never ceded, of course, and the importance of lands, culture and knowledges to First Nations people. For people who'd like a visual description, I'm a defiantly middle-aged, red-headed woman with glasses. And I'm glad that I get to describe myself visually because I pushed the boat out and ironed my green shirt for you all today. I would like to take a moment on a serious note, though, to describe and respect the contributions and the costs to disabled people and the people who are allied to them in being involved in research. We've talked about the costs of being involved in the Royal Commission, the costs of being involved in talking about abuse and violence, but we haven't talked about the costs to people in being involved in research. And there are often a lot of costs in being involved in research that's about progressing change, because often it's about things that are really difficult in people's lives. So I do just want to take a minute to talk about that and to give that a moment to respect and thank people for all of those costs. I've been asked to talk really about how research can contribute to deepening and extending our knowledge in useful ways, especially when we're talking about difficult spaces such as this. I work with fantastic inclusive teams of disabled people and non-disabled people who work together in research about violence and abuse and safety and loneliness and all kinds of tricky, difficult things. And listening to Linda talk about her work and everybody else who's spoken today has really, left me reflecting, as I'm sure you all have been, about how it's hard to make progress in these spaces. But I really want to just think in these next few minutes about what the job of research in particular is in helping us progress. Obviously, we're all working together. We all work in intersection in how we move forward. And I think the NDRP coming together is a really unique time, a really fertile time for us. I think research and evidence can help when we're working in these really contested spaces, in sensitive, difficult spaces, when there's a lot of complexity and there aren't easy answers to really complicated problems. And we've had lots of examples of very complicated problems today. When we've got policy and practice goals that might align but not be the same. And today, I think we've had a really interesting example around eliminating or reducing, minimizing, working towards eliminating restrictive practices. I think that's a great example where policy and research goals are aligned but different. Where we need multiple kinds of answers then to work our way towards solutions to really knotty problems around resolving violence and abuse or working towards personal safety or whatever our particular focus issue is. And I think then it's really easy to feel overwhelmed and to go back to our respective corners and to focus on the issue that we're working on and that we're really passionate about. One of the things that I think we can tend to do in research, though, is often to make it the job of disabled people, especially people who are marginalised for lots of reasons, lots of intersecting reasons, to identify what the harm is that they're experiencing or whether the policy problem is one that they want to contribute to changing. And in abuse about violence and abuse and neglect, exploitation, I think one of the problems there then is that we've sat with our problems for a long time. And it's really past time now that we've moved to solutions. And post-Royal Commission, it's really important now that hopefully we'll see some resourcing flowing, some opportunities flowing so that we can move to solutions-focused work. And as Megan just spoke so eloquently about, the centrality of disabled people in that solution-making work is so important. I think research can make a really important contribution from its vantage point in thinking about what evidence or particular sets of evidence can bring to help inform policy and practice and rights discussions and debates. But I think it's really contingent on researchers and the people working in research teams to make that clear. And often we don't do a very good job of that. So being transparent about the aims and the design and the approach of research matters, especially because research really can affect what happens in people's lives, for better or for worse. And I think a good example of that is the NDRP's move to safety as its first research focus. As several people have talked about, it's a really important opportunity because it's a generative one. It's an opportunity to move into a positive, productive space. So just with the few minutes that I've got remaining, I wanted to talk about having a framework that guides research and how that's really important. And I think it's a really good contribution from the NDRP. I want to lay down a little challenge as well, responding to something that was said earlier about how a framework and a strategy might help us collectively move forward to a problem about the lack of evidence that people have identified. I have a question really for you all and for myself as well about whether there is actually a lack of evidence about people talking about restrictive practices, or whether there's a lack of us listening to people talk about things that constitute restrictive practices in their lives. But we haven't taught, they don't use the term restrictive practices, and we haven't found the way of listening and acclimatizing our frameworks to what people are talking about. I want to touch briefly on the NDRP principles because they've got wide agreement. They've been very well consulted on among disabled people and allies and other stakeholders. And I think they're helpful in getting some consistency across our very diverse multidisciplinary field. And when we're looking to pursue change that moves us on from excluding disabled people from research about their own lives into a different space, I think they're really useful. So the first guiding principle is about advancing high quality research that informs disability policy and practice in Australia. And I've talked about that for a bit already. I just really want to point to the fact that the NDRP is really going to be focused on promoting collaborative research across Australia and implementing its research agenda and building an evidence base that connects policy and practice and research. So I think I've already talked about some of the tensions, but I think there are huge opportunities for research and policy to be in conversation for one another. But the explicit agenda of the NDRP to ensure that the experiences of people with disability drive this collaboration is really important. And I really think it's important that we include people who are often left out of policy design and to think carefully about how we make this dynamic and useful and engaging. And that goes to the second principle, which is how we value the knowledge of people with disability in research. And so including people in the research as participants is important, but and we're doing a little better in some of our research about including people as co-researchers, as collaborators, as research colleagues, but we are not doing so well yet in research leadership. There are not very many of us who are leading research as disabled researchers. And to build our research leadership is really important. And the NDRP, I hope, will play a really important role in building leadership from early career research onwards. And I'm really looking forward to making a contribution there, along with the other disabled research leaders that are around Australia. And connecting different kinds of evidence. I think actually I'll probably be repeating myself if I go on there. I'd like to talk about strengthening disability research capacity and building that active and connected community of people who want to work in our field, as well as building career pathways for researchers with disability, so that we're strengthening our capacity to conduct disability research, as well as to work in partnership with the wider disability community. And then finally, I just want to move to the next slide and point you to how important it is for us to share our research findings widely in useful and accessible ways. And this is just one example, which is probably familiar to lots of people of the APO, the Analysis and Policy Observatory. It has a great collection of research which is available without any sort of paywall. But there are lots of ways that we should be thinking about the way that we share our work in video, in easy read, in accessible formats, so that we're not just concentrating on our $15 words, but lots of ways for us to talk about sharing collaboratively as we move on and share our work together. The slides were moving ahead of me, so it's making me think I'm talking for too long. You can probably tell I can talk underwater, so I'll stop now. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you very much, Sally. And I especially love the challenge that you lay down for everyone listening today. And for also sharing your expertise and giving us practical examples of what's worked in research. Especially loved what you talked about there with disability leadership in research. It's really fantastic to sort of hear about the possibilities for change and when research is inclusive and impactful. So thank you very much. What we'll do